H.R. 2218, the charter school bill, would authorize state grants over 6 years to expand charter schools throughout the U.S. Democrats are trying to change the bill. This is the motion to recommit. It gets a 15-minute vote, and final passage will follow this. Earlier, the House passed by a voice vote the transportation bill. Here's how CQ reports that they passed the bill reauthorizing expiring aviation and surface transportation programs. The current Federal Aviation Administration extension expires September 17th. The bill would provide a 4-month FAA reauthorization to help avoid another partial shutdown of aviation programs and give lawmakers the rest of the year to resolve differences on a multi-year reauthorization. CQ also writes the bill would reauthorize for 6 months surface transportation programs that are set to expire on October 1st. Again, that passed by a voice vote earlier in the House. So this will do it for roll call votes this afternoon and for legislative work in the U.S. House. Meanwhile, today at the State Department, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said that no embassy personnel were injured in the attacks earlier today at the embassy in Kabul. Her comments came at the beginning of a news conference releasing an updated congressionally mandated report on religious freedom around the world. We're going to show you as much as we can from the briefing this morning while this vote continues.
Everyone. Here with me today are Michael Posner, our Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, Suzanne Johnson-Cook, our Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, and members of their teams. They will brief you on our efforts to promote religious freedom, and we'll take your questions afterwards. Before I begin on this important topic, I want to address the situation in Afghanistan, where there was an attack on our embassy in Kabul today. It appears that a number of Afghan civilians have been hurt, and we, of course, will do all we can to assist them. There are no reports of casualties among embassy personnel at this time. We are following this very closely, also the unfolding situation in the area, including at NATO ISAF headquarters, which for those of you who have been in Kabul, you know is across the street from our embassy compound. We will take all necessary steps not only to ensure the safety of our people, but to secure the area and to ensure that those who perpetrated this attack are dealt with. But I want to say a word about our civilians who serve at our embassy. It is, of course, State Department, diplomats, USAID, development experts, but it's a whole-of-government effort. And there are civilians from across our government who are there with the sole purpose of assisting the people of Afghanistan in a transition toward stability, security, and prosperity. The civilians who serve are dedicated, brave men and women, committed to advancing our mission. They will not be intimidated by this kind of cowardly attack. While they work hard every day along with their Afghan colleagues to help children go to school, to help save mothers' lives at childbirth, to build roads, to assist farmers, the opposition, violent extremists, the Taliban and their allies, engage in a constant effort to threaten and to undermine the peace and progress of the Afghan people. So we will be vigilant, but we will be continuing with even greater commitment to doing all we can to give the Afghan people who have suffered so much a chance at a better future for themselves and their children. Now, as you know, the protection of religious freedom is a fundamental concern of the United States going back to the earliest days of our republic, and it remains so today. As we look around the world, in fact, we see many countries where governments deny their people the most fundamental human rights, the right to believe according to their own conscience, including the freedom to not believe or not follow the religion favored by their government, the right to practice their religion freely without risking discrimination, arrest, or violence, and the right to educate their children in their own religious traditions and the freedom to express their beliefs. In Iran, authorities continue to repress Sufi Muslims, evangelical Christians, Jews, Baha'is, Sunnis, Ahmadis, and others who do not share the government's religious views. In China, Tibetan Buddhists, Uyghur Muslims, house church Christians all suffer from government attempts to restrict their religious practice. In Eritrea last year, a 43-year-old evangelical Christian died in prison. He was reportedly tortured for 18 months and denied treatment for malaria because he refused to renounce his faith. Of course, threats to the free exercise of conscience and religion do not always come directly from governments. Just yesterday, we heard reports that gunmen masquerading as security officers waylaid a bus of Shia pilgrims traveling throughout western Iraq. The women were abandoned by the side of the road, but the 22 men were shot and their bodies left in the middle of the desert. This sort of hateful, senseless violence has no aim other than to undermine the fabric of peaceful society. In the Middle East and North Africa, the transitions to democracy have inspired the world, but they have also exposed ethnic and religious minorities to new dangers. People have been killed by their own neighbors because of their ethnicity or their faith. In other places, we've seen governments stand by while sectarian violence, inflamed by religious animosities, tears communities apart. Now, the people of the region have taken exciting first steps toward democracy, but if they hope to consolidate their gains, they cannot trade one form of repression for another. Shining a spotlight on violations of religious freedom around the world, such as those I just mentioned, is one of our goals in releasing this report. We also call attention to some of the steps being taken to improve religious freedom and promote religious tolerance. One of those is UN Human Rights Council Resolution 1618, which was introduced by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and adopted by consensus in March. It calls on all states to take concrete action against religious bigotry through tolerance, education, government outreach, service projects, and interfaith dialogue. And we worked very hard with a number of nations and with the OIC to pass this resolution. And we will be working with our OIC and European counterparts on implementing it, and Ambassador Johnson Cook is leading our efforts. We have also seen Turkey take serious steps to improve the climate for religious tolerance. The Turkish government issued a decree in August that invited non-Muslims to reclaim churches and synagogues that were confiscated 75 years ago. I applaud Prime Minister Erdogan's very important commitment to doing so. Turkey also now allows women to wear headscarves at universities, which means female students no longer have to choose between their religion and their education. Third, as we release this report, we reaffirm the role that religious freedom and tolerance play in building stable and harmonious societies. Hatred and intolerance are destabilizing. When governments crack down on religious expression, when politicians or public figures try to use religion as a wedge issue, or when societies fail to take steps to denounce religious bigotry and curb discrimination based on religious identity, they embolden extremists and fuel sectarian strife. And the reverse is also true. When governments respect religious freedom, when they work with civil society to promote mutual respect, or when they prosecute acts of violence against members of religious minorities, they can help turn down the temperature. They can foster a public aversion to hateful speech without compromising the right to free expression. And in doing so, they create a climate of tolerance that helps make a country more stable, more secure, and more prosperous. So the United States government will continue our efforts to support religious freedom. We are engaging with faith groups to address the issues that affect them. Our embassies encourage interfaith dialogue, and we will speak out against efforts to curtail religious freedom, because it is our core conviction that religious tolerance is one of the essential elements, not only of a sustainable democracy, but of a peaceful society that respects the rights and dignity of each individual. People who have a voice in how they are governed, no matter what their identity or ethnicity or religion, are more likely to have a stake in both their governments and their society's success. That is good for stability, for American national security, and for global security. And with that, let me introduce both our Assistant Secretary and our Ambassador at Large to come forward. Thank you all very much.
Madam Secretary, could you just, do you have anything, can you tell us anything about your understanding of what's going on in Iran with the hikers and President Ahmadinejad saying that they might be able, that they will be free?
Well, Matt, as you know, we have followed this very closely, and we are encouraged by what the Iranian government has said today, but I'm not going to comment further than that. We obviously hope that we will see a positive outcome from what appears to be a decision by the government.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As you know, the State Department is mandated by law to produce this report each year. The Secretary of State also designates countries of particular concern, countries whose governments have, and I quote the statute, engaged in or tolerated particularly severe violations of religious freedom. Secretary Clinton has designated 8 states as countries of particular concern. They are Burma, China, Eritrea, Iran, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Uzbekistan. All of these countries have been long-term, chronic, and egregious violators of religious freedom. The report documents in full detail the violations that have prompted these designations. In Burma, for example, hundreds of Buddhist monks are still in prison, and the government refuses to recognize that the Rohingya, a Muslim ethnic minority, are Burmese citizens. In China, the government's overall level of respect for religious freedom declined in 2010, and is worsened this year. The repression of Tibetan Buddhists and Uyghur Muslims continues. In Iran, members of the Baha'i are arrested, expelled from university, and their leaders languish in prison. Saudi Arabia prohibits the public practice of any religion other than Islam, and the government discriminates against the Shia minority. And in Uzbekistan, it's illegal to proselytize, and it's dangerous for a Muslim even to discuss religious issues outside of a state-sanctioned mosque. These and many other violations in the 8 countries of particular concern are spelled out in great detail in the reports. But I want to emphasize that the list is by no means the only measure of serious violations of religious freedom. In a significant number of other countries, we are also closely monitoring official repression of religious minorities or official indifference to their plight, and urging governments to uphold their affirmative obligations to protect religious freedom. Let me mention a few. We are deeply concerned about the fate of Christians in Syria. Many of these people have been victimized twice. They fled the violence in Iraq, and now many are seeking to flee Syria. The government has created a climate of instability and violence in which the human rights of thousands are being violated on a daily basis. In Pakistan, the government has not reformed a blasphemy law that has been used to prosecute religious minorities and, in some cases, Muslims who promote tolerance or to settle personal vendettas. This year, there have also been several assassinations of those who called for reform of the blasphemy laws, including the Punjab Governor Salman Taseer and Shahbaz Bhatti, the Minister for Minorities, whom Secretary Clinton and I met in February before he was killed. The government of Pakistan has taken steps to address these rising concerns. For example, in March, Shahbaz Bhatti's brother, Paul, was appointed a special advisor on religious minorities to the Prime Minister. In July, the government also created a Ministry of National Harmony, which will have oversight for protecting religious minorities
on this vote, the yeas are
at a national
189
level.
and the
And
nays
in
are
August,
231.
President
The motion is not
Zardari
adopted.
celebrated.
The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The bill is adopted.
Start reading, right?
What purpose, gentlemen from Minnesota rise? Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
This is final passage on the charter school bill. This authorizes state grants over 6 years, expanding charter schools throughout the U.S. This is a 5-minute vote. Earlier, the House passed by voice vote reauthorization, short-term reauthorization for expiring transportation programs. It reauthorizes the Federal Aviation Administration for 4 months and a 6-month reauthorization for surface transportation programs. This will do it for legislative work in the House this afternoon. No more roll call votes expected after this one. This is final passage on H.R. 2218, a bill that authorizes state grants over 6 years to expand charter schools throughout the U.S. The House is in on Wednesday. They come in at 10 o'clock hour for general speeches, morning hour. Legislative work starts at noon, and among the items on the agenda tomorrow, a resolution of disapproval regarding the debt ceiling. Like the Senate measure, this is designed to put lawmakers on the record on whether they want to deny the president the authority to raise the debt ceiling by another $500 billion. It failed to move forward last week in the U.S. Senate. The president today is on the road talking about his jobs plan. He's in Columbus, Ohio, at Fort Hays High School, and he'll be speaking there shortly. You can follow the president's comments live. We're covering that live at cspan.org, and the president with a similar speech set for tomorrow. The Deficit Reduction Committee had its first official hearing today, hearing from the Congressional Budget Office Director, Doug Elmendorf. He testified for 2.5 hours or so. We'll have all of that later in our program schedule on the C-SPAN networks.
On this vote, the yeas are 365, the nays are 54. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Before the House, a communication.
The Speaker, House of Representatives, Sir, I have accepted the nomination of the Democratic Caucus to serve on the Committee on Education and the Workforce for the remainder of the 112th Congress. I hereby submit my resignation from the Committee on Small Business. Signed sincerely, Jason Altmeyer.
Without objection, the resignation is accepted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By the direction of the Democratic Caucus, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 398. Resolved that the following named member be and is hereby elected to the following standing committee of the House of Representatives. 1. Committee on Education and the Workforce, Mr. Altmeyer.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that unanimous consent that the resolution be considered as read and printed in the record.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The House will be in order.
Done.
House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, on yesterday I was detained in my state on official business, and I would like to refer to roll call vote 699 on Monday, September 12, 2001. I request unanimous consent for the following votes to be placed in the record at the appropriate place. Roll call vote 609 on a motion to suspend the rules and agree to H.R. 26 to amend the United States Code. I would have voted aye. Roll call vote number 700 on a motion to suspend the rules and agree to H.R. 2633 to amend the United States Code on time limits for appeals. I would have voted aye. On 699, this was regarding the practice of investigatory assistance, and I indicate I would have voted aye. And on roll call vote number 701, H.Res. 1316, to protect the safety of judges by extending the authority of the Judicial Conference to redact sensitive information on financial disclosures, I would have voted aye. I would appreciate the including of these votes at the appropriate place. I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection. The chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leaves of absence is requested for Mr. Barletta of Pennsylvania for today and Mr. Reyes of Texas on Monday, September 12th.
Without objection, the requests are granted. The chair is prepared to entertain one-minute requests. For what purposes does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Just the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Members fly a lot, Mr. Speaker, and so I am delighted to know that we have moved on saving and coming together around the FAA extension. Just a few weeks ago, I gathered at the airport that I represent, Houston Intercontinental Airport, to listen to the workers and those who secure our nation's airports, from flight attendants to flight pilots or airline pilots to machinists to friends that were supporting them, to seafarers, to communication workers, and an array of individuals who work every day, led by leadership from the AFL-CIO, those who work at the airport, city officials were all saying, I cannot believe that you would allow $90 million to go awry and construction jobs on airports around America to be unutilized. It is time that we move forward with the FAA authorization. It is also time to appreciate collective bargaining, which is an important element of this, and as well to recognize and respect the various needs of the FAA. I still believe there should be mandatory 2 air traffic controllers at every airport and the mandatory time of rest. We need to ensure the traveling public's safety on the nation's airlines. It is about time, and I congratulate this House for moving forward on the FAA authorization. I yield back.
Are there further requests for 1 minute? Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in the United States, throughout this entire land, there are 3,500 shelters. 3,500 shelters. And these shelters are animal shelters. According to the Humane Society, there are at least 3,500 animal shelters in our nation. Rescuing those animals, primarily dogs and cats, and making sure that they have some safety. I have Dalmatians. In fact, one of my Dalmatians was from a shelter, Dalmatian Rescue in Dallas, Texas is where I got it. 3,500. Bear that number in mind, Mr. Speaker, because in the same United States of America, there are 5 shelters, 5, for minor sex trafficked victims in this country. 50 beds in the whole nation is what I understand that there are to take care of minors, primarily young girls, who are trafficked throughout the United States for sexual pleasure. Maybe we have gotten our priorities out of sync. You know, sex trafficking is nothing more than modern-day slavery. And it is an epidemic in some parts of the world, and it even is coming to the United States. It's that crime, to me, that no one wants to talk about. I spent a lot of time at the courthouse in Houston, Texas, as a prosecutor in felony court, as a criminal court judge for 22 years, and I heard a lot of cases. But this case of someone kidnapping a minor child and transporting them across the United States for sex slavery is one of those cases that is difficult to understand why it occurs in this nation. And many people in the academic areas and others don't want to admit that takes place in this nation. But human trafficking does take place, whether it's with minors or whether it's with adults. And primarily, Mr. Speaker, it's with women. I have traveled to the Eastern European nations as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and have discussed with people in the Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, the problem those nations have when their young women are sold to other nations in sex trafficking. Here's the way it works on the international scale. One way it works. In many of these Eastern European countries, young women can't get work, can't find jobs. And so they will learn either through the Internet or from an ad in the newspaper that if they go to a certain country, they will be promised a job. And so they leave their home of the Ukraine, Romania, and they go to some foreign country. They meet up with a person, it's a male, of course, and he promises that he will take care of them and that they will get a job doing something. And, of course, what they end up doing is becoming a piece of property for that male so that that person can sell that young female into sex slavery. Back home, where they come from, their families many times never know what happened to their daughter or their sister. They have just disappeared off in some other country. And that takes place in that form in many countries throughout Eastern Europe and other nations as well. And unfortunately, those who keep statistics estimate that overseas, the customers, the ones that use that sex trafficked victim, about 25%, I understand, are Americans that go overseas for the purpose of engaging in prostitution as a customer of some person that's trafficked internationally. But let's bring it back closer to home. What's taking place in the United States? Being from Houston, Texas, the location of Houston, Texas, where it is on the map and its closeness to other nations south of the border, makes it, unfortunately, a hub for internationally sex trafficked victims that come into the United States, either stay in Houston or trafficked to some other parts of the United States. And it has become a hub, one of the hubs in this country for that awful, dastardly crime. And it works this way. This is one of the ways it works. Young women, either adults or minors, in some foreign country are smuggled into the United States illegally by someone who promises that he gets them in the United States, he's got a job waiting for them. And in some cases, these young women have paid this person to smuggle them into the United States. And once they're in the United States, they become the property of that sex trafficker. And he forces them into exploitation. He uses threats against them. It's as simple as, if you don't cooperate, I'll have my friends in their country of where your family is, I'll have them kill your family. 14-year-old girl, what decision does she make? Doesn't speak the language. She's in the United States. And this person says, either you'll cooperate and work for me, or I will make sure your parents are killed. And many times they choose the only alternative they think they have, and that's to become a sex slave and be trafficked into the United States and allow that person to use them as property in the sex trafficking business. You know, when they come into the United States, they're promised a better life, a good job, but that doesn't really happen to some of them. There are many stories. I'm going to talk about just two young women. Gabrielle, that's not her real name, but she was working to support her family in Colombia. And she was told by a friend, male friend, who recently moved to the United States, that she could make a whole lot more money in the United States if she came to the United States. And so she took him up on the offer to let him get her into the United States, but as soon as she arrived here, that same friend forced her into prostitution. She couldn't afford to come into the United States, so he said, well, I got you here. Now you got to pay your way. And the way you pay me for getting you here, and the cost of me getting in the United States, is you're going to have to become a prostitute. And you're going to work for me, the pimp. If you don't, I'll harm your family back home in Colombia. So for 5 years, that young girl was moved around in different brothels, houses of prostitution. She said after she was finally rescued, she had no contact with the public, and she really didn't even know what city she was in. And after years of servitude, ICE raided the brothel where she was held, and Gabrielle was rescued. She was one of the fortunate ones because she was referred to services where she received counseling and help to find housing and care for her own child, and also find a job. But sadly, this type of trafficking occurs in the United States. People, women, come into the United States looking for freedom and prosperity, a job that they can send money home back to their families, but they end up being property of someone else who sells them for sexual favors. There are all kinds of ways that this is done. They're trafficked through massage parlors, which advertise themselves as legitimate businesses, and they're in reality illegal sex rings. Part of that issue, massage parlors, occurs in the city of Houston, where women, primarily adult women, are smuggled into the United States from Asian countries, don't speak the language. They're used in massage parlors, which are nothing more than a front for illegal sex rings. And the problem that they have is this. This is a complicated problem. It's not an easy solution. They come into the United States, they're smuggled here, they don't speak the language, they come from a country where the police are corrupt, nobody trusts the government, and they find themselves in the United States where law enforcement tries to help them and they don't cooperate because they come from a culture where the police, law enforcement are corrupt. And they do not understand that they could get help in the United States. That situation occurs, these massage parlors occur in some places, and one of those is in Houston, Texas, where Constable Ron Hickman has put his special teams together to try to stop this epidemic that's occurring in parts of our state. And they're these trafficking individuals, the traffickers, they're smooth operators, and they will do anything to get around the law and intimidate the victim to cooperate. While victims are brought from overseas into our country, children in our own backyards are forced into a life of sexual exploitation. And let me distinguish here. I started out by talking about minor sex victims, sex trafficking victims, how there are so few shelters for them. But let's distinguish the types of victims we're talking about. We have the international victims who come into the United States, smuggled in to the U.S., and they are transported around the United States for sexual favors. Then we have people that are already in the United States, citizens, or people that are here legally, who are moved from city to city in the United States. So those are domestic trafficked victims. Here's the big distinction, Mr. Speaker. Generally speaking, if a person is brought into the U.S. as a trafficked sex victim, and she gets involved in prostitution and she's rescued by federal authorities, she's treated as a victim of crime. And there are some places to place that rescued victim. But the rules don't seem to be the same and aren't the same in some cases for domestic trafficked victims. For example, if a victim is taken from Houston, Texas, kidnapped and taken to another state in the United States and is forced into prostitution by some pimp, and law enforcement gets involved and they find her, many cases she's treated as a criminal. She's arrested for prostitution. She's not treated as a victim. Now, in all deference to our law enforcement folks who do as good a job as they can, there is no place to put that trafficked victim as a victim of crime. So she's put in the criminal justice system, many cases the juvenile system, because there's no place to put her. There are no shelters. There are no safe houses. There are no beds for those types of victims. And of course, it's a problem of resources. But it's something that we need to understand how difficult that is on a minor child who is a victim of crime to be shoved into the general public or general population as a juvenile or in the criminal justice system, to get her out of that system and treat her like a victim. And of course, she has a whole life ahead of her. And it starts out, she's in the criminal justice system. And once that happens, next time she's seen or picked up by law enforcement, even with good intentions, she's put back in the criminal justice system or the juvenile system. So we have a standard here where we need to understand that we need to treat the victim of that traffic, the young woman, the minor child in some cases, they need to be treated as victims of crime and not criminals. We'll get to the criminals and who they are in just a minute. You know, traffickers use and contact very vulnerable young women. Many times they abuse, they manipulate these young women, the children, these girls primarily. They come from all families, but sometimes they are homeless. They're runaways, or in some cases throwaways, as some call them, and they're very susceptible for trafficking. They really have no place to go. In our society and in our culture, they have no place to go. And so when they're roaming the streets and somebody comes up to them and treats them nice, promises them that he'll take care of them, give them a place to stay and give them money, they're susceptible to that. And once they get into that environment, they become a slave. They are a slave in 2011. And our culture needs to understand that. The pimps in many cases will do anything. They will beat them, they will abuse them, they will drug them, and they will manipulate them through old-fashioned brainwashing. Take the story of Maria. Maria was an 11-year-old girl. 11, Mr. Speaker. That's her actual age. And she was raised by her grandmother in Los Angeles. When her mother died, and when she was very young, her father was not involved in her life. Her mother died when she was young, and her father wasn't involved in her life. And this young girl, as most girls in my opinion, needed a male, strong male figure to help her, was looking for someone since she didn't have a father figure around. And she didn't know that this male figure would end up being someone who would treat her as a sex slave. One day, this individual approached her, treated her nice. He was 28 at the time, and he took her shopping, bought her new clothes, treated her nice, took her to his house, and as soon as he went into that house with her, she didn't realize that she would never return, never, to her own home. He treated her well at first, but soon he had other girls who lived in the house take her to a house of prostitution, for lack of a better phrase, and show her how to be a prostitute. Because, you see, she was 11 years of age. And she later learned that she was making about $1,500 a night that she turned over to this 28-year-old pimp. Later, she said she was beaten and brainwashed and stuck in this life and trafficked throughout the United States. Her pimp got all the money, making her believe that this is the way it should be, and that he deserved the money while she was being raped by multiple men each and every night. He told her he owned her, and she believed it because she was 11. She was still maturing into society, and what was right and what was wrong was all being taught differently to her. Maria was arrested on multiple occasions and didn't even know her grandmother and her sister were looking for her until the first time when she was arrested at the age of 14. Fortunately for Maria, there was a place for her to go to receive specialized services, and she was able to get counseling and eventually able to get out of this life of being a slave. She finally believed that she had some self-worth, where she believed before she had no worth as a person. Part of the problem, Mr. Speaker, is we don't have enough places for young women like Maria. 50 beds, only 5 shelters, I understand. So the United States, as a nation, as a culture, as a people, the greatest place on earth, we need to understand that we have to deal with this issue. It's only going to get worse. And ignoring the problem will not solve the problem. And of course, all different branches of law enforcement must work together, local, state, and federal, on this issue. And especially on the issue of the fact that international trafficking victims in the United States seem to have some places to go when they're rescued, and domestic trafficking victims don't, and especially those who are minor trafficking victims. The Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act of 2000 was the first large-scale federal law to address human trafficking in this country. And what the law does is this. It addresses both the global and domestic trafficking problem and also establishes an annual trafficking in persons report that analyzes the issue of global country-to-country trafficking and places countries on a list, and a tiers is what it's called, of the worst offenders. And I think we should know who the worst offenders are. The worst offending nations in the whole world that are kept up with, all countries are kept up with, on human sexual trafficking, slavery, here they are: Algeria, Burma, the Central African Republic, Cuba, New Guinea, Iran, I'll repeat that one, Iran, North Korea, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Madagascar, Saudi Arabia, the Sudan, Turkmenistan, Venezuela, Yemen, and Zimbabwe. Those are the worst countries for this issue of international sex trafficking. This legislation was reauthorized in 2008 as the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Reauthorization Act. We've improved the law over the years, and it's time that we make trafficking, international trafficking, domestic trafficking is an issue, a human rights issue, a children's issue, whatever you want to call it. It's wrong, and we have to deal with it in this country. And we cannot put an end to it until we are aware of the fact that it does occur. And just like the old days when we used to say, many people used to say when I was a judge, oh, gangs aren't a problem, you know, there are no gangs in the United States. Yeah, well, we found out that was wrong. And the same issue when it comes to human sex slavery. It is occurring, and it'll only get worse unless we do something about it. Our laws must identify the people in the system. And I think it's important that we take the child, the trafficked person, and treat them as a victim of crime. We have to have that mindset, and that in many cases they are a victim of crime, and we as a culture need to recognize that and treat them that way and rescue them from that environment. That's the primary duty that we have. Rescue that child. Get them out of that environment and help them. And let me tell you, these are hard people to work with. These young women are hard. They are difficult. The agencies that work with them find them very difficult to work with. But that doesn't mean we should give up on them. So we take the victim and we work with them and treat them like a victim. Then we take the customer, the person that pays for the service, pays the slave to perform some sexual activity. We take that person and we prosecute those individuals. And when they're convicted, I think their photographs ought to be on the Internet. Line them up. Let the country know who these people are that live in this nation that buy sexual favors from children. Show who they are. But prosecute those people. Too often in the area of prostitution, you know, there are even some states that want to abolish it as a crime. Too often we center on the prostitute. And in some cases, the prostitute, unlike some of the cases I'm talking about, you know, is committing a crime. They're doing it because they want to. They're not forced to do it. That's a different situation. But we center on the prostitute. Very seldom do we prosecute the male, the person who uses the service. Our society better start prosecuting the person that needs to be prosecuted. And then we deal with the trafficker, the slave owner. And there is no punishment that is strong enough for the slave owner in this country. Go after them. Make them know they're not going to do business in the United States and traffic international victims or domestic victims in this country. We will not stand for it. But let's come down hard on those guys and go after the other ones, too, who use that service, and treat the victim as a victim. People who use that service, they need to know we're going to find out who they are and we're going to publicize their names, because that's the demand that's created in this country. And we cannot continue to let those that pay to abuse children continue to roam our streets. And we need to treat victims as such. I am the co-chairman of the Victims' Rights Caucus along with my friend Jim Costa from California, and that's one of the things we're trying to do, is to raise awareness for victims of crime, especially those of domestic trafficking victims that are arrested and treated as criminals when in the case they should be treated as victims of crime. We must make sure that international and domestic victims are both treated as victims and both receive essential services, and there must be services provided for them. We must also make sure that the victim in this case is rescued. That as a society, that is the first thing we try to do, is rescue them. As I mentioned earlier, it's my understanding there are only about 50 beds for minor sex trafficking victims in the United States in 5 shelters. We need to solve that problem and help those organizations that work with victims of crime have resources to house and treat and take care of those very special people. There are many organizations that are trying to help in the area of rescue, stopping trafficking victims. I'd like to mention those before I finish, Mr. Speaker. Of course, I mentioned Constable Ron Hickman of Precinct 4 in Houston that's working on the prostitution involved in massage parlors and trying to rescue and prosecute the people who are involved in that, but also rescue those victims that are very difficult to work with because they come from a culture where they don't work with law enforcement. Another organization is the Arrow Ministries in Texas. The YMCA International Services, the Children at Risk in Houston, that does a great job. They do exactly what their name says. They try to take care of kids, children that are at risk. Houston Rescue and Restore, Arrow Ministries, Redeem Ministries. On the national level, there are other organizations, the Shared Hope International, the Rebecca Project for Human Rights, Polaris Project, Catholic Charities, Humanity United, World Vision, International Justice Mission, Vital Voices, the Coalition to End Slavery and Trafficking, Amnesty International, the End Child Prostitution and Trafficking, Free the Slaves, Not for Sale campaign, and Break the Chain campaign, and there's that great organization as RAIN as well. Mr. Speaker, we as a culture, as a society, as a country, as a people, I think that we are judged. We are judged as a people. The United States claims that to be the world leader in human rights, and I think we are the world leader in human rights, and we should continue to be, because we've been blessed with so much. We should try to protect that dignity of humans throughout the world, but especially humans here. But we are judged not by the way we treat the rich, the famous, the popular, the powerful. We're judged by the way we treat the elderly, the weak, the poor, the children, victims of crime. That's how we're judged, not by the way we treat these other people. And so I hope that we understand the necessity, the importance of taking care of our greatest resource. And our greatest resource is children in this country. No matter who they are or what's happened to them in their life, but we need to take care of them, especially those young that are, in the year 2011, become the slaves for money. Let's take care of this issue, Mr. Speaker, and stop this crime against humanity in this country and be the world leader. And that's just the way it is. I yield back my time, Mr. Speaker, for the chair to do as it wishes with the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, will control the remainder of the time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How much time remains?
33 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. Mr. Speaker, you know, a lot of times people ask me, why do you have a special order when the chamber is not in session? And it doesn't appear anybody's paying any attention. We all have monitors back in our offices, and many of our members who are not in attendance get a chance to hear what other members have to say during special orders. And it also allows us, if people across the country happen to be paying attention to what's going on in Washington, it gives them a chance to see and hear some of the issues that we're talking about. One of the things that really concerns me, that I hope everybody's concerned about, is the terrible spending problem we have here in Washington, and that spending problem and what that spending problem causes. You know, when you spend more money and you print more money and it gets into circulation, that's called inflating the money supply. And when you inflate the money supply, ultimately that means that everything that money buys goes up in cost. The trucks that transport our goods and services across the country have to pay more for diesel fuel, more for licenses, more for anything else. And all those costs are passed on to the people whose products they carry. And those people who make those products have to make a profit, so they have to raise the price of those products to the people who buy those products, whether it's a supermarket or a clothing store, whatever it is. And then when the consumer goes to buy those products that are transported, they have to pay more for them. And that's what we call inflation. Now, we have, in the last couple of years during the Obama administration and the last part of the Bush administration, passed a bailout bill and a stimulus bill that have cost collectively close to $2 trillion, and that does not cover the other programs that have been increased, thus costing more money to the government and the taxpayer. And then just recently, because we had these terrible crises on Wall Street and the banking crisis that we've had, we had the bailout, which cost well over $1 trillion when you talk about the interest that's added to it. And because the economy continues to founder and we have unemployment that's above 9%, the Fed decided to have what they called QE1. And QE1 was quantitative easing, which increased the money supply again by several $100 billion. And then we had quantitative easing, or QE2, which has raised the amount of money in circulation and exacerbated the problem that we're all facing today. And so I'd like to talk just a little bit about how this affects the average person. Mr. Bernanke, who's the head of the Federal Reserve Board, he said that we don't have to worry about inflation. He said that long term, the inflation rate is not going to get above 1.7 to 2%. But let's just look at what the average person has to pay when they go to the store or the gas station to buy products. Milk, and everybody drinks milk, especially if you have kids, milk has gone up 38% since last year. That means if you buy milk, for every dollar you're spending, it costs $1.38 as opposed to last year. That's inflation. The price of sugar, and sugar is used in cookies and cakes and all the things that we use on a daily basis, chewing gum, everything. The price of sugar has gone up 20% since last year. That's inflation. The price of corn, which is used in feed for our animals, it's used in gasoline now. It's used on a daily basis by people across this country. Corn has gone up 62% in the last year. So for each dollar that you spent for corn a year ago, now it costs $1.62. And as of August, the cost of beef, hamburgers, steaks, whatever you buy, went up 13% over last year, and that amounts to about 52 cents a pound. So when you go buy a pound of hamburger, it's going to cost about 52 cents more than it did a year ago. And that's killing the American people. They tell us we do not have inflation. And anybody that goes to buy groceries or any commodity that's transported across this country is paying a heck of a lot more than they did last year. So when the administration and the Fed and the Treasury Department say we don't have an inflationary problem, talk to your wife. A husband, talk to your wife. Wife, talk to your husband when he goes to buy gasoline. And everybody knows that the amount of money they're making is not keeping up with inflation. And that's why we have to get control of spending here in Washington. We have to get control of the entitlements. We have to get control of every government agency, and we have to get rid of a lot of government agencies that are not doing anything to really help our economy or our country. You take, for instance, the Department of Education. Everybody says, well, we need to have a Department of Education. Why? Education is supposed to be conducted at the state and local level, controlled by the state and local governments. But we have an education department, and what has the education department contributed to our society? The quality of education has gone down, 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 to where we're one of the least educated, as far as the quality of education is concerned, least educated countries in the Western world, in the industrial world. So the Department of Education really isn't contributing anything except gobbling up an awful lot of our taxpayers' dollars. And there's a whole host of agencies like that that we need to get rid of because we don't have the money to pay for them. And yet the government, the President came up the other night and he spoke in this chamber and he said, we are going to have to spend another $447 billion for a jobs bill. And it's the same old story being written again and again by the administration. That's what we tried to do with the bailout and the stimulus bill and these other things. Remember the shovel-ready projects? The President said, well, we didn't have as many shovel-ready projects as we wanted to. And as a result, we didn't see anything except more and more unemployment. Throwing money at the problem does not solve the problem. All it does is it costs the taxpayers more money, either in taxes or in a hidden tax that they pay when they go to buy food, clothes, groceries, or gasoline to get to and from work. And that's the problem that we have right now. The President has a socialistic European approach to government. He believes that government ought to control health care. He believes that government ought to control the energy sector. And if we pass what was called cap and trade, which would deal with energy and the emission of CO2 into the atmosphere, it would raise the cost of electricity and everything else that we use dramatically. In fact, he said himself during his campaign, or even before that, that cap and trade would essentially cause the prices to skyrocket for energy. Just another thing that the American people have to pay for. We don't have the money in our pockets. People's salaries aren't going up. We've got a huge number of people unemployed. We're paying unemployment to them on a weekly basis so that they could survive. They don't have the money. But the government keeps spending and spending and spending, and we can no longer afford it because it's going to hit us with higher taxes. That's what he talked about right here last week. More taxes that we don't have, more spending that we can't afford, which leads to more inflation that people are feeling right now. And if people don't believe me, who may be paying attention to this, and I'm talking about my colleagues back in their offices, talk to your wife or your husband when they buy gasoline or go to the store. The average inflation rate right now, I would guess, is somewhere around 13%, and that's something we cannot afford. It's going to kill this economy and kill this country as the country that we've known all of our lives, and what we're passing on to our children is a lower standard of living than we've had, and we cannot afford that any longer. What we need to do is streamline government, go back into our entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and figure out better ways, not eliminating them, but better ways to solve that problem. And this House has sent a plan over to the Senate that would do that in an efficient and economic way and not bankrupt the country and solve that problem. We need to go through every agency of government, and if they're not doing their job or if they're not necessary, get rid of them. Cut them out. Reduce the size of government. Cut government spending. And then in addition to that, we ought to do like Ronald Reagan did when he came into office and we had double-digit inflation, double-digit unemployment, and double-digit interest rates. It was actually as bad or worse than it is right now. And he came in and he said, instead of raising taxes, as they said he had to do, because they said that would bring revenue into the Treasury, he said, no, we're going to cut taxes. And the reason he did that was because if you raise taxes, you take money out of business, you take that money out of people's pockets, and that's money they can't spend. If they don't spend, they can't buy. If they can't buy, we don't produce. And if you don't produce, more and more people who do the producing are laid off and go into the unemployment lines. Conversely, if you cut taxes, you give business and industry more money to invest. You give individuals more money to spend. They can buy more and invest more, and we produce more because people can buy it, and that creates jobs. And when we create jobs, we create more taxpayers. And we went from $500 billion in tax revenue under Reagan to $1.3 trillion, almost triple, because we cut taxes and stimulated economic growth. This administration believes in more government control over our entire economy and our society. And that's the reason we're in the mess we're in today, because government cannot create something unless it takes something away. We can't give jobs that the government creates unless we take it from you, the taxpayer. And that means either raise taxes or spend money we don't have and print it, and that creates inflation, which is a hidden tax on everybody in this country. The bottom line is this country is in a very difficult situation. I serve as chairman of the subcommittee on Europe and Eurasia, and I'm going to be going to Greece in a couple of weeks. And Greece has a socialistic economy. They're going down the tubes right now, and they're trying to find some way to bail themselves out. They're raising taxes. They're raising taxes on everything, electricity, everything they can. They're cutting the benefits to the people that work there because the benefits have been too high and the people can't, and the government can't afford them. All of these things, the salaries are being cut. And what's happening in Greece is it's going belly up. And the effect of it is on all of the other countries that have investments in Greece, the banking, the financial institutions, all of them are really in trouble. And they're talking about a potential domino effect because of the failure of Greece and because of the socialistic approach that they've taken. Italy's in trouble, Portugal's in trouble, Spain's in trouble, even France is in trouble because they've invested a lot of money through the financial institutions into Greece. So the whole European continent's in trouble because of the socialistic approach to government. The thing that's kept America so strong all of our lives is free enterprise, the profit incentive. For a businessman or a person to say, I want to make something of myself, and they open a gas station or a store, and they work their tails off, and they have a chance to make their lives better. But when government starts taking over everything, it ruins it. That's what's happening in many countries in Europe, especially Greece. And so if any of my colleagues are paying attention on the Democrat side of the aisle or who are independents or on the Republican side, I hope that you will realize the number one thing we have to do right now is get this government under control. We need to cut regulations so business isn't strangled by the regulations that's costing them more and more money that they have to pass on to the consumer or they have to fire people because they can't afford them. We've got to cut taxes to stimulate economic growth, and that will bring more money into the Treasury, just like it did under President Reagan. And we've got to make sure that we eliminate unnecessary spending in these agencies of government like the Department of Education. Get rid of them because they're not doing anything except gobbling up our money. If we do that, we're going to turn this country around and we will remain the greatest country in the history of mankind. If we don't, if we continue down the road that this administration is taking us down, moving us towards socialism, toward government control over health care, energy, everything, then we'll see the quality of life that we've enjoyed go right down the tubes. It's up to the American people, and it's up to us in Congress to take the bull by the horns and deal with this. So I say to my colleagues, please pay attention to what I've said tonight. You may not agree with everything, but if you'll study the things that I've studied and look at what's going on in Europe, you'll understand very clearly that what I've said has merit and we need to do it. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.